Okay, welcome back to another lecture. This time we're going to be focusing on an ecosystem and some of its characteristics. And we're going to start with a very, very important term known as biodiversity. And when we talk about biodiversity, we all know it as the variety of life. And probably one of the most important variables within an ecosystem. It is the one thing that creates stability within an ecosystem. And the reason why it does is the more variety you have, the less a particular limiting factor can prevent life from continuing. So if you have many species and many different species, and you have a limiting factor that comes in, the chances are that some of those species will be tolerant to that new limiting factor, and therefore the population will continue. Well, biodiversity comes in many, many forms. All right, and some are fun to look at and interesting to see. And we're going to take a quick look at some of these. If I can get it to go. There we go. How about like a walking fish? Or a giant salamander, the world's largest. Or the coconut crab, huge. Or my flat turtle. Or this little creature that eats floating debris, or the most poisonous of all animals, or some of the smallest, or some of the most unusual. Speaking of unusual, you got it right there. And even the world's smallest snake, only the size of a quarter. Now that is biodiversity, and that's what we're going to be studying here. So let's start with genetic diversity, okay, and species diversity, and ecosystem diversity. These are the three types of biodiversity, all right, that we need to explore. All right, so let's look at the first one, ecosystem diversity. With ecosystem diversity, okay, we're talking about providing more than just one type of ecosystem, more than one habitat. The ability for wildlife to use more than one feature of the earth. So in the picture here, it's very simple. You could say, in this particular case, you have ecosystem diversity because you have mountaintops for colder climates, lowland forests, you have a river running through, you have an ocean, and all of that within one small area provides diversity of ecosystems. All right, and very important. Then you can take that down to a smaller scale of species diversity. And in case of species diversity, you're talking about the individual species, where you have a variety of life within an ecosystem. I'll get back to that in just a second. And the last one down here we call genetic diversity. Okay? Genetic diversity is the diversity within the DNA of a particular species. And it's that diversity which allows the life, this particular species, to flourish from generation to generation to generation. It changes, it mutates, all right? And the more genes you have in the gene pool, the more ability it has to adapt to specific limiting factors. So you have those three types of diversity, which will all become very, very important. All right. Now if we move on, dealing with species diversity, there's two terms that we come to use a lot, and that is species richness and species evenness. Okay? And let me try to describe the difference between the two. Richness, when you have species richness, you're talking about biodiversity in which you have different types of species, many different types of species. The greater richness you have in your ecosystem, the more variety of species. So here we're talking about the different species. Okay? And that's called richness. Okay? The number of species within a given area, within a habitat, within an ecosystem. All right, we call that richness. But that's not always the best way to describe biodiversity. With species, you have to come up and use this term species evenness. Okay, species evenness is represented by how many individuals you have of each of the different species. Now, let's try to put this in perspective here. Okay, evenness tells us whether or not a particular ecosystem is dominated by one species, okay, over all the others, or is all of the populations of each species even or equal. So at the bottom here I have my beautiful chart here of two different ecosystems. All right, and I think you'll start to realize exactly what this all means, where you have the first one, number 1 we'll call it, and then we'll call this one number 2. And if you look at the difference, which one of those two do you consider having more evenness? They both are equal in richness. Okay, because if you look at it, one red star, or there's yellow stars, there's red stars, yellow stars, blue stars, white stars, green stars. And you have the exact same number over in number 2. Red stars, yellow stars, blue stars, white stars, green stars. So in terms of richness, these two are equal. So let's take it to the next step. What about evenness? Well, in the first one, in number 1, you have 4 red, 4 yellow, 4 blue, 4 white, and 4 green. But now go to number 2. All right. What you have are 4 rows of 4 reds, or 16 reds, 1 green, 1 white, 1 blue, 1 yellow, and therefore the evenness is very poor in number 2. So of these two, you have to go back and say that number 1 has the greatest biodiversity because its species are more even. Okay? So species richness is just a number. In this case, they were both equal in richness, which is a good measure of biodiversity. But to get a true measure, you want to also look at this concept called evenness. All right? All right, let's move on a little bit. Here's a great picture I just wanted to show you of the example. If you look at the bottom picture of the tropical rainforest, okay, here you have tremendous biodiversity, as you can see, and you have tremendous evenness where you have a few of every single species. At the top is also a tropical rainforest, but this is along the coastline. It's called a mangrove forest. But here, you are dominated by mangrove trees, yet you still have biodiversity. There are many other plants in there, but the dominant plant is mangrove, the trees that are hanging in the water with their roots. So the top one, all right, this one has less evenness than the bottom one. Therefore, we have to give this one the nice blue star because it has greater biodiversity, because it has richness, which might be equal, but this bottom one has more evenness. Okay? And that's the concept, and I think hopefully you got it. All right, if you read this very carefully, this sign, it says, "Beware of nature. Due to recent studies, experts in the field have decided to release a warning about the phenomenon known as nature. Nature has been said to take over land that is neglected by loving and caring humans. In severe cases, when nature becomes too expansive, wilderness has said to occur." Now, this phenomenon is actually real because we give it a name. All right? And this is called succession. Many times we call it ecological succession. We like to call it that. All right? And this is how an ecosystem is dynamic and changing at all times. This is just an absolutely amazing phenomenon that occurs where an ecosystem slowly goes through a series of changes to revert back to its original biome or what's originally there. Okay? So we call it ecological succession. All right? And it comes in 2 forms. The first one is called secondary succession. Okay, and if we have secondary succession, then we must have primary succession at some point. All right, and I'm going to go through both of these in a second. But just to give you a quick overview, secondary succession occurs when an ecosystem has been altered or changed, and now it has to start the process over again to convert back to its original biome. All right, so keep that in your head. It's when you already have an ecosystem and it has been altered or changed. And that altering and changing could come from a human disturbance, such as a forest being cut down to put in a plantation in the rainforest, or a woodlands is cut down for farming here in Pennsylvania. All right. Primary succession is a little bit different. Primary succession occurs when you got a brand new ecosystem developed. All right, it could come from a volcanic eruption, and now all of a sudden you have new lava rock. Okay, or it could come when you create new sand dunes, and all of a sudden you have a brand new, start from scratch ecosystem. Okay, secondary is far more common. Okay, this one is way more common. We see it a lot around here, and that one we're going to study first. And then primary, we just had to add a couple steps and show you how that works.